Thanks very much for those two presentations. Jerry, could you say roughly what percentage of domestic and international studies your unit is able to actually monitor?
Turn yours off.
Okay. We do compliance, not-for-cause compliance visits. They're a small percentage. I gave you numbers that there are, 10,000 FWAs out there and 6,000 IRBs. These are very small numbers. Percentage-wise, they would be small. I mean, the way the system works, the way the system functions, I was very serious about the point about being a partnership. In terms of making the system work, you need all the players together, and that includes the funding agencies, us, working with FDA.
I guess, okay, just a quick follow-up. So very small percentage, like 1 or 2%?
Come on now. Okay. It's probably under 1%.
Okay. So my question is, do you see this as a problem for your agency? In other words, do you think the ability to be able to monitor a larger percentage would be a really positive step for your organization?
It's on. Okay. I actually don't view that as one of the greater problems. Again, it gets back to there are many, many players. And I think I would, it's similar to themes that came up earlier today in terms of one of your earlier panels. It was interesting. I thought one of the persons who was at one point criticizing some degree of international research also made the point, I thought later on in the talk, that with regard to, for example, NIH-funded research, because of all the protections that are built in there in terms of all of the things that have to be done to get NIH funding and that how scrupulous NIH is about that sort of thing. My suspicion is that there isn't a huge problem there in terms of that, or at least the problem isn't unique in terms of international research. So in whether certainly it would be nice to audit certainly a higher percentage, probably because that would send a stronger message. But do I think that's a huge problem? Probably not. I mean, I would love if we were getting, more complaints, and you never clear what percentage of the bad things that might be happening there are being brought to our attention. But at the moment, I wouldn't have put that way up there. And that gets back to part of what FDA does, because FDA actually has far more resources in terms of doing that. And my understanding is even in terms of percentages, it's a small percentage of the studies that they review, but they do have sites around the world, and they do actually look at again, that percentage, and they help us out actually in terms of sharing that information.
Great. This will be a question for Dr. Lumpkin. I wanted to ask a little bit about the decision a few years ago by the FDA to drop the Declaration of Helsinki and adopt the GCP in its place, and particularly the questions about the ethics of using placebo in studies where there is a standard of care might have the role that might have played in that decision. Yeah.
I got it figured out. All right. No, it's a very good question, and I think when we published the new rule, those were questions that were brought up. And when you go to the Federal Register and look, we tried to answer those questions in there. And I think they go to several. Number one, I think we believe in the concept of GCP. There is incorporated the ethical principles not only in the documents such as Helsinki, but many of the other documents that have been mentioned here today. But that it gives you a much stronger framework for actually requiring certain things to happen that a principles document itself does not. So I think we've tried to argue, and we believe very strongly that we haven't sacrificed principle by looking at a much more harmonious way to look at this, and so to give you a strong framework, but to give one the flexibility that one needs to say this is what we've agreed to in many, many different parts of the world. I think it's important to remember on the declaration itself, it's not something that's incorporated into how we do stuff in our own country. So going back to what we talked about this morning, it's never been incorporated as a sine qua non for what happens in our own country, because we have other ways of assuring that the principles of Helsinki are met within our own country. And I think GCP does the same thing kind of on the international part. The European Union has not incorporated it into its rules. It, like we, recognize the principles that are there, but as far as a way of trying to say this is the framework and this is what we mean by how one would interpret it, I think we believe that the GCP actually gives you a stronger way of doing that. Now, the placebo part is an interesting part, and I know that many people have brought that up. I think it's an issue not only for international context, but it's an issue for our own country. So the issue of the ethics of placebo-controlled trials are ones that come up quite often with the various clinical trials that we have here. And I think we continue to believe that there are times where it is quite ethical to do a placebo-controlled trial. There are times where it is grossly unethical to do a placebo-controlled trial. And that's where, as you talked earlier today, judgment comes in. You can't write that into a reg. It's not black and white. One has to use judgment. One has to look at what one is trying to do, the context, the situation, what's actually happening. And I think the GCPs gives us the flexibility to use that judgment to decide with the larger communities when it's ethical to do it and when it's highly unethical to do it.
Does the GCP say anything specifically about placebo?
I don't know that it specifically says anything about they are ethical, they are unethical. In fact, I know it doesn't make these kind of definitive statements there. I think, though, that people, when they recognize from the scientific robustness perspective, that in order to have data that's interpretable for individuals and the community, it has to come from a well-controlled trial. And what does it mean to have a well-controlled trial? And there are many ways. Our regulations and those in many other parts of the world recognize different ways to control a trial. And placebo is one way, active is one way, no treatment is one way, there are historical is one way. There are a lot of different ways that you can do an adequate and well-controlled trial, but you have to explain why it's well-controlled and why it meets the needs. There are times we wouldn't take a historical control. There are times we wouldn't take an active control if the active in and of itself is not an interpretable outcome because there are no data to support the activity of that particular compound itself. So I think the scientific and therefore the ethical issue is, do you have a well-controlled trial that will give you interpretable data at the end? And in certain situations, placebo is a way to do that. In certain situations, there are many other ways that we recognize and others that you can get to the outcome that you want.
If we can move quickly, we can get our final three questions in. Anita?
Dr. Lumpkin, I was fascinated by your statement that the FDA does not give any concern for where a drug will be marketed. And I thought about that in light of the great interest and progress you're making in the areas of personalized medicine and population-specific medicine. Can we be blind to where? Because sometimes where is a proxy for to whom. So could you just clarify for me the relationship between our concerns about costs and benefits, risk and benefits, and our blindness to regional marketing?
I think the issue for us is where we have jurisdiction. We obviously have authority within the United States, but our jurisdiction ends at the U.S. border. And what my statement was meant to convey was that when somebody comes in and submits a marketing application to us, they're asking us, based on these data and based on how we want to present this product, may we do this in the United States? They do not have to ask us, may we do this in Canada? May we do this in other parts of the world? That's not our jurisdiction. those countries are sovereign nations. They have their own, and they get to make their own decisions on what happens there. So what I meant by that is when a company comes in their marketing application, if they have marketed it previously in other places, they have to tell us that. But they don't have to tell us the future as to, well, here it is for the United States, and oh, by the way, we're going to go here, 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 and here. That's what I meant by it's not a matter that we don't care. It's something that falls outside our jurisdiction. On the issue of the personalized medicine, I mean, that's a definitive question even within our own country. And you're absolutely right. We're seeing more and more times where people are looking at products and clinical trials that are not designed for a population as they were for most of the 20th century, but they're designed for people who meet a certain genetic profile or people who have certain ways that we have better technology now to help us decide who can benefit greatest from this product and who would have the least tendency to have risk from it. In that situation, absolutely care, because that's the claim for whom you're going to be using it. But that would be within the U.S. Context for us.
Doctors Lumpkin and Menikoff, thank you so much for joining us for this session.